Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm exploring how technology, behaviour and data intersect, what that means for decision making. My guest, Paul Armstrong, has some fascinating insights to share. He's a thought leader on the future of technology, disruption and innovation. He's the founder of Behaviour, an emerging technology advisory firm that works with a number of high-profile clients. Paul has also worked in the tech industry in both the US and the UK, has written a book called Disruptive Technologies. The new revised version is just about to be published, and he's the creator of the TBD Conference, an annual showcase of subjects relevant to technology, behaviour and data. In our discussion, Paul talks about all of those things and how the conference, which is how I first found out about him, came about. Now, this year's TBD is taking place on February the 23rd, and if you want to join me there, have a look in the show notes, as Paul has been kind enough to provide listeners of this show with an exclusive discount on tickets. Before we begin, my usual reminder that my book, Humanizing Rules, Bringing Behavioral Science to Ethics and Compliance, is coming out in March, and you can pre-order your copy now. When you do so, keep hold of your receipt, and you'll be eligible for access to exclusive events and content. Links to where you can order it from are available in the show notes. With all of that said, let's get on with the show and my discussion with Paul Armstrong and his insights on technology, behaviour and data. Paul, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
It's an absolute thrill to have you here. And look, I was sort of struggling to work out how to introduce you, so I figured maybe the best way is, can you tell my listeners a little bit about yourself?
Oh, God. Yes, sure. So I call myself an emerging technologist, so not a futurist. People study for that. I enjoy the future. I like learning about where things are going and sort of forming my own opinions on that. But I am by no means a futurist or a futurologist. I like looking through the world using technology, but also bringing people along with it, if that makes sense. There's no point. The whole point of technology is to make people's lives better, if not why we're doing it. But the idea is, I think sometimes we've lost our way and sometimes we push the technology before the people. And so I really wanted to start something. When I came back from America, I was working for MySpace, marketing, promo, all that sort of thing. I really wanted to sort of start seeing all these technologies that were emerging, Facebook, Snapchat, all of that sort of thing, and also the hard technologies, AI and that sort of stuff, through a lens of like, how do we make these helpful? You know, rather than buzzwords and just people spouting like hot takes and that sort of thing. How do we actually say, no, these need some sense, or you're going to run into problems down the line with your business? And that's where Behaviour, the emerging technology arm of TBD Group, comes from.
Wow. And look, tell us, so the way I came across you was through TBD, which is the conference that you produce. So I guess let's start with the bigger picture thing and talk about TBD and then morph, as I'm sure you effortlessly will, into talking about the conference.
Sure. So TBD, Technology, Behaviour and Data, is a framework, or based on a framework, in a book, which I wrote called Disruptive Technologies, which a new version of that comes out January, let's just say January 2023. A lot thicker than it was last time. I just got a copy of it. And the idea behind it was essentially to push out a framework, or we call it a framework, but I just called it how I do business with people, if that makes sense. We ask them questions, and there's a simple version, and I think the publishers maybe call it a Compass or a Compass Plus version, which is essentially a more in-depth version of helping people make a decision and then figuring out or determining the correct level of investment for that decision or a different decision that they've done. And the idea behind it is essentially you figure out beforehand what to do if you get a certain score, right? And so we call that process a decision matrix, which is essentially a list of things that you'll do if you'll hit 15 or above, or 25 versus 26. It's however the company wants to decide. Some are incredibly intricate and there's one for every number. And the other ones have like, if it's above 15, we'll do something, right? So it's whatever works for your company, okay? The idea of doing that up front is you've done all your fighting up front. So if something happens, you know what's happening because you've got that list beforehand. So there's no mystification. There's no one slamming on the brakes or anything. Like, you've got that clear process. And all that does is it just cuts through the red tape straight away. So nothing at the end. You've done all the work and scuppered it. You actually decide up front what to do if, okay? Once you've done that, you just basically have three questions, which is, what does the technology do essentially? So figuring out, can the users do what you're asking them? And then you've got, will enough people do what they're asking? And then what will people do what you're asking, right? So TBD, right? Technology, behavior, and data. Each of those has a 10 score. You decide what the level is based on a load of research and asking people and that sort of stuff. And then you add that up and you've got your score. And then after that, you do your action based on your decision matrix. So that's a whistle stop tour through the book. It's a lot easier once you're reading it and obviously seeing pictures and diagrams. But the idea behind it was essentially to stop corporate innovation just faltering at the end. I heard so many horror stories of people saying, "Oh, we spent 6 months doing this and X, Y, and Z, and just stop right at the end because they figured out the price, and that sort of thing." It's like, why don't you factor that into how you're making the decision, and that sort of something. Like, tell them, is it worth us doing this? If that, so that's what TBD does in a nutshell. It sort of blows up all the bad things that you're sort of can get done for at the end of something, and says, let's talk about those up front. So I'm not wasting my time, not wasting your money, and that's the thing. And that's how we do it. And the idea behind the book was basically giving that out. There's only one of me and that sort of thing. Love to, chat endlessly.
So it's scaling up Paul, basically.
Yeah. In the wild, if you use it on your own, it's probably not worth anything, So the idea, if it can help other people. I've heard people use it in really tiny startups. And I've used it with companies like Meta and that sort of stuff. It can be individual teams, can be whole companies. So it really just depends, and the idea is it's flexible, scalable, and that's the thing.
And so can you just give my listeners an example of sorts of things? So you're talking about, it's basically when we talk about decisions, it's technology type decisions, but what would be an example of the sort of decision that you put through the framework?
So we've done things from should we create our own Snapchat lens all the way through to should Tesco, introduce 3D printed pizzas in the London boroughs, and that sort of thing. So it's as big or as specific as you want it to be. It's, if you can count up to 30, you can use it, and it's incredibly useful. Even just doing the decision matrix for most people is like, as a company, have we ever sat down and decided when things are a yes or a no? Or is it just on Bob's shoulders? And that's why Bob says no a lot, because Bob's scared, and that sort of thing. So it's really just figuring out, what's the stopper in your company. And it's not to just railroad innovation through, it's to push the right innovation through that makes sense for your business and your business goals based on what you can foresee.
I find it's really fascinating. When I look at tech, you've got a very, very simple analysis, right? You've got people that are just like, if it's tech, it's a good thing, we should bring it through, right? So technology is always a good force for good. That's the sort of the positive advocate side of it. The flip side is this newfangled stuff is only going to cause us problems, and we sort of sit in the dinosaur era. And clearly the reality is somewhere in between those two things.
Yeah.
But what I thought was fascinating about it is you're kind of going, okay, technology's here, we have to deal with it. And whatever business you're in, you're going to have to make decisions around technology. But how do you take those decisions in an intelligent manner that reflects the fact that human beings are going to have to use it? There are going to be things that we ought to think about, unforeseen consequences. We've seen what happens when technology goes wrong. When you get issues with tech, it can go scalably wrong.
Yeah.
And so what you're basically saying is, look, these decisions are things that are going to have to be taken. Here's a way that you can think about that and make sure that you make the right bets, right? Spend the money on the right thing, spend the time on the right thing.
It is not hedging those bets. It's making the right bets, or determining what your level of risk happiness is, or what your current fiscal calendar will allow, and that sort of thing. So it's however you want to do it. And that's why I made it so, because you can close it down very, very quickly if you wanted to. And some companies have, but you can, the reason why I left it open in the book is because it's much more powerful that way, to sort of open minds to opportunities and that sort of thing, which they might not have thought. Some companies you talk to, they go, oh, we know what technologies come in, so we're going to focus on those. You go, but have you thought about, and they go, no, we've only got these 4, it's AI all the way, and that's the thing. You're like, oh, okay, sort of thing. But you can see when they start to sort of open their brains a little bit to, like, maybe how they manufacture, or how their company that they use is manufacture, that they can start to see a larger picture forming and they get more value from it.
Love the fact that you're bridging technology and people, because again, those are things that are, people in the behavior, but obviously, is that sometimes those things are not thought about. So we'll introduce something that is a system that is theoretically perfect, right? That will do the job that if you just left it in the hands of coders and programmers would be perfect. And then you bring these bloody awful human beings that don't behave in the way that you want. And so you're bridging that gap of sort of saying, how do we get the best out of both of those things? And for me, that I find really interesting, because I think sometimes you get the behavioral people that don't want to talk to the IT people, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so you're really bridging that gap and saying the only way this can work is if those two things work in harmony, and we reflect the limitations and benefits of both.
Yeah. And that was really important to me. When I was writing the book, I was like, how do I write a book that doesn't just talk to one person, but it might be one person in the business, but they have to have the mindset and also the ability to talk to multiple levels. Because as we all know, with the best will in the world, most businesses out there are siloed. However people sort of set them up, they are siloed because people are people, they're siloed because of location, and that's stuff. The great thing about what COVID, if we can say it has a legacy, is that it has forced people to perhaps use technologies in a way that has enabled more collaboration and more interactivity, and also gotten to know people a lot quicker, because they never would venture to like floor 7, but now floor 7 doesn't exist and it's just a call away, which is the same as the person they used to sit next to, and that's the thing. So it's a much more sort of, I think, a real world approach to how technology is and certainly will be. When you look at all the technologies that are coming down the line, all they're doing is helping people.
Right. But it's so easy. You see so many times where, and let's pick government as an easy example to ridicule, but it's like things go wrong because we've introduced a new system. Yeah, some of it's going to be because the system is crappy, right? Maybe they've cut corners on not spent as much money as they could have done, used some weird procurement process that's not thought things through. Often it may be down to the system that, even the best designed systems, you've got human beings that need to be trained.
Yeah.
And you can say, well, the way we'll get great analysis out of the system is people will fill in 500 pages worth of forms. And that's great in theory, right? Actually, the average human being isn't going to do that.
Yeah.
And therefore, this brilliant system that is heavily reliant on your third point, on the data that we put into it, actually fails on that level. So you're really looking at this thing of saying that we need to understand that interface. So if I looked at the sort of Venn diagram, to the extent that I can diffuse what you're doing into Venn diagram, it's looking at those intersects and really thinking, okay, how does this work in the real world? As opposed to many business decisions that take, theoretically, let's stick this in a spreadsheet. Let's have a committee decision around this. You're going, let's look at the nitty gritty here and the underlying factors.
And that's really what the Compass does, or the expanded version of TBD, because TBD on its own, the short one, anyone can do, any level, any age, that sort of thing. It's just literally do some research, count to 30, figure out what your 10s are, and that's the thing, add them all up. The Compass includes different parts of the business, right? From IT to leadership to marketing to all of those people that are involved in whatever decision is made, yes or a no, that will have an impact on their future. And so figuring out where they go from that was a really important bit. And what I love most about the Compass is that you cannot move forward until you've got scores from other people. So it bonds people together over the sort of idea. Because usually when finger wiggles innovation comes through, it is from a marketing option, or leadership's gone somewhere, seen something, they want something implemented. Guess what? It gets implemented, and those are very forced. And sometimes people push back. They might not think they are, they might not want it actively displayed that they are, but they will push back in different ways. So that the Compass really just brings those people together and say, we need to evaluate this thing. And if we get to these certain bits, this is what happens. So no one's got the mystification. Everyone's sort of on a journey together, and they go, yeah, the car might not go the full way, but at least we're working together and we're going to figure this out and make a decision based on this. And we know what potential could happen. So no one's scared. No one's like angry, because they've all predetermined that. And that's why, it was so important as well to get the data in, because that helps you go, oh yeah, it's a 7, not a 6, or it's a 4, not a 2, and that's the thing. So it just helps people sort of in their minds, move forward without necessarily, having to worry about things, because you've got the backup behind you.
And you've mentioned this is the second edition. When did you write the first one, and what's changed since then?
Well, as you know, I'm only 21, so I wrote this.
Well, given you're a child prodigy,
yes,
right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Out of the womb. No. I wrote the first book in 2017. Never thought I would update it because it was sort of pretty standalone. And I knew the technology would move forward, but I've been busy writing another book about CEOs and risk, which I'm sure we will talk about at another time. And that will be with a different publisher. But during COVID, they said, oh, you should update the book. And I was just like, why? What? I was like, what? And they went, yeah, it's sold really well. And like people are using it in universities and that's what I was like, what? I was like, I never knew any of this, And so I thought, yeah, why not? So when you update a book, you could obviously write the same book all over again, but you only have to update, I think about 20% of it. And that's the thing. So there's, I did more than that. There's like 15,000 new words and updated, obviously, stats and things like that. So yeah, I agreed to it just because A, it had been a long time, and B, COVID. What else are you going to do, right?
So what's changed fundamentally in that period of time? Because on the face of it, right, 2017 could be decades ago, could be whatever. Let's ignore the COVID lens for a second. But technology's moved quite a way in that period of time. So presumably a lot of human behavior, I guess, to a less, we're the same. We've learned a lot of new things, but the basic fundamentals of human OS hasn't changed that much.
No, exactly.
But is technology the big driver of what's changed?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, people's understanding of technology also drives adoption and that sort of stuff. So, if anything, people are now more aware of things like AI and what it can do, or at least that it's out there. And that's important from a future perspective because obviously those technologies reign. If you think in 2017, you had nothing like ChatGPT, which is, people creating whole essays of things, but using an AI sort of tutor, if that makes sense, or creator. And so that was the biggest sort of one. Like machine learning has really sort of come on leaps and bounds. We still don't have the humanoid robot behind me going like, Paul, you ready for a beverage? That sort of thing. So, I think people often look at a film and go, well, we're not there yet, so nothing's going to worry about it. But then you start to say, well, actually, those things are on the way. In Japan, you've got helpers, which are helping turn people in beds, robot helpers. So all of those elements are out there and sort of moving forward. What I love about technology is it's never really standing still, even if it feels like it. Just someone behind the scenes is just working like the clappers to make the next big sort of leap. You used to be able to look at things like CES and see a real sort of like North Star of like, oh yeah, this is the year of smart cars. You're like, oh okay. But it never really is what they sort of end up saying. But you can see some real indicators on what people are putting together, who they're partnering with, about where they're going in 3 to 5 years. And that's an interesting sort of area where I find technology is still sort of going. When you look at the technologies in the book, which are AI, holography, so AR, VR, MR, all of that sort of stuff, you've also got 3D printing. That I don't know why. I don't own a 3D printer. I've used one. I've seen many in action, big and small. It fascinates me with how badly that has sort of like come forward.
Right, right.
Because, the machines were cute. They made some beautifully designed ones, but they were really small. And then they made huge ones, which were really, really ugly and really, really expensive. But actually, you look at them now, and if you're in somewhere that's disaster ridden or something like that, you've got a new home in 24 hours and it's got 2 floors. It's incredibly impressive how they sort of are doing it. I think they just did in Japan, was it China? Can't remember, China or Japan, a 3-story hotel in 7 days. So if you think about like how we build now and how we build in 20 years, it's just going to be insane. Obviously with 3D printing comes the bad, sometimes people will take it the bad way, and you've got 3D printed guns, which is, just as terrible as it sounds really, it's one of those, areas where you come into tech and you just go, yeah, when you add the people bit, it just ruins it, sometimes. But you have to people create the nice and also sort of check the bad. But yeah, there's a lot of regulation coming with all the technology. So sorry, I waffled. It's 3. So you've got AI, AR, MR, VR, and that sort of thing. You've got 3D printing, 4D printing now as well. You have holography, you have nanotech, so that's graphene, super strong new structures. And then the 2 new ones that we added were Web3 and metaverse, and that's the thing. So quite a sort of departure from where the hardcore technologies were, because it's gone from like physical stuff to digital, and now it's gone super digital, if you want to say, deconstructing businesses and how we, will do everything from mortgages to, making massive multi-billion business decisions. So yeah, it's a real departure from where it was. So that's what I quite like to sort of push the book on.
You go out of your way to say I'm not a futurologist, and I think there's a nice humility there, because I also recognise that you clearly know what you're talking about, right? And you looked at all these things. So to some extent, I know you wouldn't want to put your neck on the line, and in some of the examples you've given, your tech that one might think would succeed often doesn't, as you say, because of human factors more often than not. So it's capable of doing it, but we don't want it for some reason, until somebody, a Steve Jobs or whatever, comes along and packages it in a way that makes it interesting for us. But to a certain extent, I mean, you have got a good handle on sort of the underlying dynamics. So without asking you to sort of predict exactly which technology is going to there, I would say that I think to some extent you are a little bit of a futurologist in the sense of you're looking at things that might emerge, and you won't necessarily, I guess it's a bit like saying you may not be able to pick the winning horse, but you've got a sense of where horse riding is going and the dynamics of horses and what makes a good race. And so as I look at that, I find your insights really fascinating, because you've spent time diving into these things that we all sort of have an awareness of. I guess it's sort of just intellectual curiosity. So you're not, in a way, I think it always strikes me that your interest in this, because you're not trying to predict the winner, you're just interested in the underlying dynamics. That gives you some quite interesting insights.
Thank you for that, number one. Number two, I've always, because I've written a lot, right? So I used to write for Forbes all the time, which was just knackering, so I gave that up. But I also write for lots of other places when they ask me to, and usually around a book launch, who's to say? But it's no, I try and keep my sort of awe in. And when I was in America, I got on the journalism bandwagon through PR, right? So I was hawking DVDs to people, with the Dead FHM, I was on all of these different subgenres, right? So I had a counterpart who was doing the top 50 and that sort of thing. And I was doing the ones for like alternative weeklies, kid magazines, which, like Basildon Gazette or whatever the equivalent would be. And Baton Rouge Mum, and that sort of thing. And gay and lesbian, all these, so all the fringe sort of stuff. So you had to like think around things, okay? And when I was thinking around them, you had to pitch them differently. And I was just like, you had to do a lot of research around, what would the alt weeklies think of the new X movie, and that sort of thing. So I sort of started drawing these sort of spider diagrams. And you can sometimes see links between them. So that's where I sort of like got that analytical thing. I did psychology at uni, which is the degree, as we all know, you do if you don't know what you want to do in life, right? It was kind of fortuitous that I went into sort of marketing and PR, which a lot of people do after psychology. But I always knew I didn't want to stay there, if that makes sense. And then an editor basically contacted me and said, this pitch is hilarious. Because I was always never taking my job seriously, which I should have done. Sorry, guys. But it was always like, because you send an email to someone, you're sort of like encroaching. So you should make it at least fun, And some of them were serious, but I also had a lot of fun writing them. And they said, we think you could write stuff. Have you ever written stuff? And I was like, only these emails / would you like to cover any of these DVDs? Then she was like, no, but we should have a coffee. So I went and had a coffee with her. And she said, would you like to write a column for us? And I was like, what, on DVDs? No, thanks. Get enough of that at work. Cheers. And then she went, no. What are you interested in? I was like, oh, I like a good gadget. Let's do some tech. And we'd also, we were working with Yahoo Music at the time, all of that sort of stuff. And I just went, oh yeah, tech's the one that I'm sort of like interested in. I would like, she was like, great, we don't have one of those. Consider yourself hired. I'm not paying you anything. I need it in by the 15th of every month, 3 things, 400 words each. And I was like, okay, what? So then I did it and sort of got into the other side of the world, which made me a better PR person, sort of understand it all and that. And then when you do that, you get asked of things, and it was just a sort of snowball effect. And then I would write for more people. I had to write under a pen name because I was working for Sony at the time as well. They were a client. So Paul Stone was out on the web, which is my mum's maiden name. So it was very weird the way that it all came through. But that was how I sort of got into sort of hardcore tech and figuring out where the connections are. And my sort of USP, or how I sort of did it, is I was like, I'm not going to put my neck on the line for multiple things that I don't know enough about, but I will tell you what the indicators are and how you can make a better decision because of it. And that seemed to gel with a lot of people, rather than just being, as you put it earlier, a cheerleader for tech. That's pointless. We have those already, and that's the thing. And I am a cheerleader for tech. I'm very positive about tech, but I'm also very aware that there are downsides with technology that if you don't think about, mitigate against, or act for, you'll get scuppered by them and nobody benefits then. But it was funny when you were talking earlier, I always think of that picture. I don't know if you've seen it, the one where they've put a path and it's around a corner of a park or something.
I know where you go. Yeah.
And it's got like a tree on the end, and all they've done is like gone the shortest route, and that sort of thing. So you can create a beautiful path, really, really safe. And then all the people will just create a mud track and it's just as safe, just as quick. And you've missed that people want to get around there quicker. Why did you put the tree there? And that sort of thing. So that's where I've always sort of thought, if I can help people not make that issue, not make that sort of problem for people, then you're leading the world in a better place.
And it's interesting when you talk about those pictures, and I'll put a link to one of those in the show notes. But there's tons of examples of sort of where people design paths, and then human beings decide where they actually want to walk.
Yeah.
And I think it's known as desire paths or cow paths.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you should pave the cow. In other words, build the path where people are walking as opposed to trying to force it. And there's a great example I saw recently of something in Wales. And the only reason I know it's in Wales is there's an Asda store. So for people outside the UK, this is the I think Walmart own Asda here. So it's a supermarket, big sort of hypermarket chain. And so there's a Welsh sign there. So that's the only reason I know it's in Wales is because of that. But they've written this very aggressive sign in English on the thing saying, please use the purpose paved path. And I love that example because it's like aggressive. It's going, no, you're wrong. You must use our path. And we've done this and you will use it. A little bit like, well, if you build it, they will come logic for technology. And what I think is interesting about the way you're talking about it is there's tons of stuff that sort of people develop with either commercial or even sort of just social intent that just doesn't land.
Yeah.
And we're sort of foisting on people, you will take this. Right? And it's like, well, Actually, I won't. I will decide. We collectively will decide. Sometimes we get it wrong. Like we pick really crappy tech
Yeah.
when we could pick much higher quality stuff. But I love that idea of you sort of just standing back a little bit and just saying, let's not, let's sort of look at why is the sort of the dash in a particular direction happening? And therefore let's analyze those reasons and try and understand that, as opposed to being part of that dash.
Yeah. It's funny, like you read so much stuff and you go like, well, you're not being paid by them. So like, why are you being so like prophetic and sort of like loving of it and that? There are clear downsides, in essence, you're not really doing the reader a lot of help if you just go, oh, run towards the fire, you'll be warm, and that sort of thing. You're like, you get burnt if you get too close, and that sort of thing. Fire is a great thing if you use it in the correct way. So that is always the sort of what's in my head is not to just tear down stuff, but I will say people create a load of rubbish, and that sort of thing. It's like, you don't need that. It's fun to have. It's great and it works, but the world doesn't need to know more about it. They'll find it if they need it. My one bugbear in life is when everyone, Facebook, Snap, anyone rolls out a new product. You get one chance to go, this is the new product and here's how it works, right? And that's when something like stops what you're doing on there and it goes, you need to X this out to do what you wanted to do start with. And you go, great, and then you don't ever use that feature again. The way they launch stuff, they could get a lot further, a lot quicker if they figured out that like putting something in the front of like the person when they first load up is not the way to train people on what to do. And you see it all the time in businesses as well, the way that they launch innovation or anything like that. And I'll give you a great example, actually. So we were launching a digital department for an agency. And I said, okay, great. Here's how we do it. Webcast, rolled out, digital. And they said, no, can't do that. What we're going to do is send everyone a mouse pad and a pen. And it said, digital is blank. And they had to fill it out with their own pen. And I said, I don't think that's going to really get your message across of like what you're doing and sort of all that sort of stuff. They said, oh, no. Obviously it comes with an email. I was like, oh, obviously that would be, yeah. Well, that's all right then. They doesn't want an email to read. And like, God forbid if they get one and before the other and all of that sort of stuff. And I just went, This is all reliant on human beings, putting them on desks and like making sure that everyone's good and like, not covering up. I went, I think this is the wrong strategy. Anyway, they went with it and it cost them a bomb and all of that sort of stuff. And nobody thought that they had a digital arm for about a year, apparently, according to like internal polling and that sort of stuff. It was absolutely insane. That was a few years ago now. I don't think I would do it the same, but it is, just thinking about people, their reaction, who you've got to bring with you so that it's a success internally, so that it can be a success externally is just so important. But most companies, at the last knockings will go like, oh, get them a stress ball, put our logo on it, with a URL they've got to go to. And you're like, number one, wasteful, more trash. The environment does not thank you. And the other one is like, has anyone ever asked you for a stress ball? And also, if you are thinking that you need a stress ball, if you need a stress ball, you might not be doing the right thing. It's like, I know I have to talk to HR first, and that. But yeah.
But this is really interesting because it strikes me. And I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. So this is really, really helpful to me. So thank you. But it's, you get people sort of launching new interfaces. Like we've redesigned our app and you're like, how do I now do the thing that I used to do really easily? You've just made it 100 times. And you're right, you get blasted with new features. And it's funny because it's all organizationally centric, right? We've spent a load of time reprogramming this. And so we are going to make a big song and dance about it. And what we want is that kind of incremental change. And if there's an amazing feature, you're right, give it to me at a point where I might be interested in that.
Yeah.
So find a way of making me aware of it rather than smashing it in my face and presuming that just because you've spent a ton of time on it, that I care about it. And I think that's a really valuable point.
What happens when you usually fire up an app? Sometimes you'll get an ad straight away or like produced by and that sort of thing, but never before you go like, have you got 30 seconds? And you go, no. And you go, okay, we'll show it to you next time, that sort of thing. I know it's funny, having worked for MySpace, you've got different sort of ideas of why that sort of happens and like people's updating behavior and that sort of thing, but it's still happening. So the vast majority of people have not let they update, but they hit roll and then they go, it's there, it's done, it's whatever, that sort of thing. And sometimes there's two rules of thought. Number one, stumbling along something like you found it is often better for people because you sort of feel, oh, I found this first before other people. And then the other one is like when you introduce someone, they say, you're welcome. And they don't say, here's why, they always go, you got it. See you later. Bye. Our job's done. And they run off the other side and they go, it's just done. And I'm learning more about as my parents age and that sort of thing. And as I become IT support full time, that you basically, these companies are not thinking about how they're moving users through their lifespan. And so I fire up Facebook. It looks exactly the same as it does for me than it does for my mother. Now that's stupid on Facebook's point of view because failing eyesight, sorry, mum, I'm not going to out you, but failing eyesight needs it slightly larger. Most people get a little bit colorblind as you go older. So their use of like red and green is not going to help anyone. And also pudgy fingers, when you get older, sometimes you get larger or your skin just gets looser and it's harder to like hit the buttons. So, do we need different, what do you call it, version of maps for old people? Or are we just reliant on Apple and Android to basically say, oh, you're old, you want a big font, bye, and you've got it. And then your phone I look at my mum's phone and I'm like, I couldn't use that. It's so big, the fonts and that sort of stuff. But it's how she has to manipulate that phone in order for it to work for her lifestyle. And so you look at then Facebook and it's tiny, teeny writing and that sort of stuff. And they can't make head nor tail of it. So they get frustrated. And that's why things then don't get used. And that to me is, a big opportunity for tech to sort of understand, as we, for the UK at least, moving to an aging population, we can't just keep, adding and adding and adding. For some, I would say you're better off recommending a reduction in functionality, but knowing your customer better when they're older than just, simply dropping off a cliff, They're the ones with money still.
But it's interesting, right? Because take the opposite end of the spectrum, kids, right? A lot of effort is spent in kind of kids' versions of X, right? So whether it's my first phone, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of time and effort is spent at that end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And so if I think about something like Lego, for example, right? So there's, he says as an adult of Lego, right? But there's, there's clear age ranges, but it sort of runs out. We don't think about, well, maybe old people want to do some Lego, right? So what can they buy? They can buy the kids' phone. And I think it's really interesting when you put it in those terms is that one end of the spectrum where you're right, kids are picking up tons of cash. You could actually think about, but I don't, for some reason that gets missed.
Well, the one thing that they're not missing at the moment is those dark patterns to mistakenly get kids to, whoopsie daisy, I've bought 10,000 Roblox. That's obviously going through the European courts at the moment. No, actually, they just settled. I think they just settled and they have to pay an inordinate amount of money because they accidentally made something super easy for people to transfer money to them. Isn't that crazy? Madness. Figuring out sort of like, it's not just about big buttons. It's not just about figuring out colors, but it's use cases and what they want to do. Why are you showing them anything new? They're just interested in their like friendship groups and sort of like, groups that they're in for their local areas and that sort of stuff. These are the sort of like, those are the big trends that I'm sort of seeing as like an app doesn't stay its whole lifespan as that app. It becomes something different for different age groups based on its behavioral, not just the shitty news feed that we all know is rubbish, pumped full of rubbish. It can change our mind, brains, happiness levels and that sort of stuff. And nobody really wanted it, and asked for it. We just sort of got dopamined into it. You look at TikTok and the way that their algorithm works and you go, mate, they've got it. They know what I'm searching for, what I'm interested in and that sort of stuff. And that makes them dangerous. It is one of the things where, if a government is taking that off of, we'd call it politicians and those people's devices, that we may need to look into that company more.
Really interesting. And I love this idea. As you were talking, I was thinking about, affordances. So for listeners unfamiliar with that, this is the idea of you can take something that's designed for purpose A and use it for purpose B. So standing on a chair instead of having a ladder, right? Not what the chair is there for, but we can use it. So we have to, and we do the same thing with technology. And so it's interesting that on the one hand, we do see a lot of they pay a lot of attention to what users do. And so we do see evolution. And I think people at Amazon are very, very good at this, right? Which is sort of, how do we sell more stuff? Well, the answer is we pay attention to what people are looking for and we find clever ways of pricing and we can test things out.
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, I see tech as being really smart about this stuff. On the other hand, as you've just rightly pointed out, there's a bit of a lag there with thinking about, it seems to be a very sort of mono lens, for want of a better phrase, way of looking at stuff. Is that in some ways, there's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of thinking about humans and end users. On the other hand, as you've already pointed out, there's this vast swathe where it doesn't happen. There's almost a blindness around it.
Well, could you imagine, for example, like you look at Amazon, which is one of my favorite subjects. I create a newsletter every week called What Did Amazon Do This Week? Free to subscribe. You don't get anything if it's free, but you have to pay a subscription. Then you get it. But it's fascinating to see what that company publicly does and then very privately does at the same time. So it's really interesting from a UX perspective of looking at them. They're also being dragged through the courts for being bad people and accidentally, obviously, I would never say they would do it on purpose, put all of their stuff at the top. So, people sort of buy their brands. It's crazy to think that. It would be terrible capitalism. But what's really interesting is the way that they design their apps is, as you've said, they go, oh, you want a salt shaker? Maybe you need a pepper mill that goes next to it, and that's the thing. And that's a very simplistic answer. But also, if you then look at that company and they go, oh, well, we do know that you are diabetic over here. So why would we show you this really high sugar content over here and that sort of stuff? And that's how you start to iteratively design a new, perhaps better, perhaps worse, perhaps more creepy, you decide, experience for those sorts of people. And that is where apps are sort of missing. Have you ever, for example, on Amazon, have you ever had an eye test through Amazon?
No.
You could do that. They could do that. They could say, oh, his eyes are terrible. Number one, here's the nearest opticians in your area. Number two, we're going to change our app so that it's a bit brighter when you use it. And that's like, all of those things are possible. It's two things. It's number one, a user could set their own brightness, but also an app can just use more vibrant colors if they wanted to and that sort of stuff. But you never see that. They make the best decision to make themselves more money. 100% understand that. Lights have got to keep on, all of that sort of thing. But actually, by doing the same and sort of boring people and sort of, oh, it's the same app and I get frustrated with it and that's the thing, they're missing that next 10%, and that 10% will keep you for another 5 years,
All fascinating. And your newsletter, and when I first got it, I was like, why is he so obsessed with Amazon?
No.
I just couldn't get my head around it. And it took me and then I was like, oh, this is it's basically a very smart proxy for where are they experimenting and playing with things? What are they doing? And therefore we can learn some valuable lessons from it. And I suddenly was like, oh, that's really clever. And so you go into, it's a heck of a lot of detail as to what's happening within the organization. So I thought it was just like, wow, this is like Amazon fanboy gone crazy. And then I stepped back and was like, no, Paul's not an idiot, right? He's doing this for some reason. And as soon as the light bulb came on, that was on me, not on you, by the way. That's me just kind of being slightly sort of cynical and confused. But I was like, oh, that's really clever. So you're just looking at them and saying, here's an organization that innovates, right? And they can afford to innovate because of the amount of money they're making, the scale they have, and so on and so forth. And therefore that gives us a leading indicator as to where things are going. That's the right logic?
Yeah, pretty much. I kept getting asked about Amazon by clients and that sort of thing from a commerce perspective, also from a technology, because 2017, I was halfway through here fourth and that's the thing. So I've been going for 5 years, and Alexa was like, everyone's voice. We need a voice strategy, don't we? We need voice. Tell me about this voice stuff. Everyone's got them in the homes. I was like, okay, number one, not everyone's got them in the homes. Number two, you don't need a voice strategy right now. What do you want voice to do? And that sort of thing. So we were like, oh, we want to do sampling through it. Well, can already do it. Work with these people. They'll do it for you, and that. So it was just knowing where that sort of technology was going. And I just saw Amazon make a lot of bets in a lot of new areas where I went, they're going to really pivot soon. And now you could argue, yep, Prime is one of the most, they made it easier to cancel, but it was one of the most hard things to cancel on the internet before.
Yeah.
And I just went, that I can learn so much from that company. It might all be good, that sort of thing, but they are the ones that are moving things, and that bit more than Apple were at the time. And that's, well, still are, but they won't, they'll come into it soon. And I just sort of went, it's one of the largest companies in the world. They can change a market. Also, all of these poor sellers are going in there thinking like, oh, they're my friend. They're going to sell loads more stuff. They're learning off of you and they'll make their own brands. And that's what's happening, So I just looked at them and I just went, number one, this is a hideous form of capitalism, but it is beautiful in its perfection of the system and how it can morph and that sort of thing. And I just went, there'll be a change of guard soon because Jassy was, Bezos was getting bored and going into space. So, someone's going into a completely new system that they're probably not as bothered about this place as they should be. And I just thought now's the time to sort of look at them. And it covers it from content, which again, it disrupts loads of markets, models and that sort of thing. Technology, they introduced brand new technology and opened up a huge new market and that sort of thing. And then you've got retail, obviously, where they're, world leaders in e-commerce. And now they're starting to even, probably get to a number 2 level with how Asia does e-commerce and super apps and that sort of stuff. And so you're starting to see a company that's forming. Where I became super interested is when I started hearing whispers that they were going into healthcare, because I was like, oh, if they know about our levels of our bodies and that sort of thing, they'll be able to sell stuff. It's like personalized retail. And you could just see the strings like forming between them. And you see those parts move and you can see them move increasingly together and together. You were talking about Venn diagrams over. They become that company you can't live without them.
Right. Because it's plugged into our very, literally who we are.
Yeah, it's sort of the nexus of where everything sort of connects and where do we go through from there. is it like in America? You don't have it over here yet, but they're your doctor. They can be your doctor as well and that sort of stuff. And a lot of people go like, no. And they go, yeah, they bought a company and now they've got telemedicine. And do you know how they launched it first? They went, we're buying a telemedicine company for our employees. And then you're like, that lasted a month. And then they were like, we're rolling this out to the rest of the world. The speed at which they do things as well moves mountains and makes people who you think would be like, oh, it's fine, we'll just keep on our treadmill, and they speed up and they do things. So they're a mover. That's why I follow them.
And it's a fascinating sort of venture capital model in that tons of stuff can fail.
Oh, they fail fast.
Right,
They fail all
and
the time.
does.
Yeah, fail all the time.
But that's the whole point. So you accept the fact a ton of it's going to fail, get a few successes, and you nail it. And I
Yeah.
think that's the interesting thing about that business
I have a slight issue with that. Is that like when everyone's like move fast and break things, I'm like, maybe just not move as fast and break fewer things, you know? And people go, oh no. And the one thing that's driving that is the VC model, that hungry VC model where everybody wants to get rich quick and then bail out and be like, oh, if your business works, that's fantastic, but I don't have a stake in it, so I'm good. And we just need to change that a little bit. That's a big ask, but that's one of the things where I think a lot of VC firms fail is they don't employ people. And this is not a plug. You hire anyone who you want, but hire people like me who can identify like, do you know what? Because these three things are happening, this fourth thing's going to happen. And that's where you need to start going. You know, when you look at the makeup and the educational background of VCs, they are not future facing people. They've never been taught how to do it. They've never been taught how to like look 3 steps ahead. And that's not future gazing. That's just connecting 3 business dots to figure out, oh yeah, there's going to be a market there, you know? And, personalized pet food, not really rocket science, but that was one of the ones where people go, oh, that just came out of nowhere. You're like, really? Young people caring more about their pets, not having as many children, not being able to own a house. You're like, couldn't really see that coming, that's me. So it's for me, one of those areas where if we change just slightly, you could see massive, massive repercussions of like what gets funded. More women would get funded, minorities would get funded. But because we have the same stodgy white people, no offense, there's lots of other people around there that aren't those things that I've just mentioned, you start to sort of see why the patterns repeat themselves.
And I agree with that. I think, for me, things like if you start with quarterly reporting as a logic,
Yeah.
right, and the sort of, well, we can take a portfolio approach to things, but it's all short-term thinking.
Yeah.
Right. And you're right, that's missing. And I think societally that's quite dangerous. And so it strikes me that we're going to need regulation in this space. And there's already talk around regulating social media because, well, frankly, if we're regulating traditional media, we should absolutely be regulating social media. And so I can see a logical thing of saying, Amazon is going to get, it probably is already having massive, and not just from a competition perspective, but for some of these other behavioral and societal pieces that we might not have identified. So it sort of seems to me that if we looked ahead, and I could, they're going to lobby against it and find all sorts of ways around it because they've got the money to do that. But it does seem to me that if we thought about it, regulation in this space is going to be necessary. It probably already is necessary, but it absolutely will be in future for all the reasons you point out, because we've got to deal with some of these dynamics.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest one, and the EU's taken the lead on it, which will then domino effect into America and other areas, is anti-competitive behavior. And that's the thing. It's like, I always say, if you have to egg the pudding, is the pudding worth it? And people go like, well, it's how we make money and keep the lights on. You're like, or you could build a better business. These are not mutually exclusive things. You're just choosing one thing because it's easy and fast, and that's easy to say sitting on my lofty perch and that sort of thing. The realities of running a business these days, certainly through COVID, pandemic, inflation, everything, incredibly hard, stressful, and that sort of thing. So easy decisions are made. And I get why there are pressures, but if you do not have an eye on the horizon about where things are going and how to get there, without killing loads of people or trees and everything like that, then you got to watch some, like, what you're doing. You're just here to get yourself from A to B, and like the B is the coffin, like maybe you want to like fun a journey on the way, and that sort of thing. But I always try, and when I talk to like leaders and people that I work with, and I do ask to speak to leadership all the time, because you can tell within about 2 minutes of talking to a leader whether your project's going to be a success, and B, like how innovative you really want they want you to be. You sort of get the sense that I need you to think bigger. A lot of leaders think small to like protect their bubble, but imagine if you could grow your bubble by thinking larger, and that's the thing. And the big word I keep knocking around at the moment is collaboration. I'd be like, when you've got so many forces on you, the only thing that will really sort of stand the test of time is collaborating. Build that bridge between two things. You'll be stronger for it. Doesn't have to last forever. You don't have to like buy each other at the end. There's ways of working, getting mutual benefits, that a lot of businesses just miss at the moment.
I was thinking about that in a different context, but it sort of resonates too. If you look at like music, for example,
Mm.
for a long time, right? Yes, you have solo artists, but you also have, and you have bands that, Rolling Stones break up for a bit, do our solo projects, come back together. I feel like it's someone like Elton John, who is reinventing himself by doing duets and collaborations with other artists,
Yeah.
right? And he's particularly re-releasing a ton of his old stuff, just repackaged. Oh, let's just bring someone else with a sprinkle a bit of their stardust in there. And so for me, that's a really interesting model of thinking, well, why can't you think in those terms in business,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't have to be just the way we've always done things. And so I love this idea of just thinking a bit more creatively, but that's scary, right? Which is why, again, I think your behavioral focus is interesting, because we have to start recognizing some of the limitations of human thinking.
Yeah.
What are the factors that are driving us to make short-term decisions? Well, that's the way we're pre-programmed. So how do we deal with that? Well, we need a bit more cognitive diversity.
Yeah.
So let's hire differently, but let's also, we don't necessarily need to hire those people. Let's just bring people in for a short period of time, or work with other people who have those skills. And so when I start to think about the vision that you're painting, if we just are able to step back, and I think this is the problem with the pace of life now, is that it's very difficult to sometimes do that.
No, I would agree. I think, I don't know. Well, I mean, the pace of life, right? Do you wake up one morning and feel, I feel like the world's spinning faster than it was yesterday? It's like, not really. It takes time, right? To sort of look back, and sort of most of that happens to you and you go, oh God, it is going faster, isn't it? But actually, when you think about it, most businesses are cyclical, that's the thing, be reactionary. And so you can count on those things. And sort of the only thing you can change is your reaction to those things. And that's why that framework that I put in the book works so well, because it takes into account people's biases towards the end of going, oh my God, that's a lot of money. Oh my God, 6 months, I can't see 6 days down the line, and that's the thing. And you've fought all those battles up front. And that's why that decision matrix was at the front and not at the end. Because if you don't have the buy-in of all of the people that you need, you're not going to get it at the end. You've done a great work.
Right.
Congratulations. You've spent 6 months doing something and you've got a check mark, but you're not going to get promoted the next year, and that's the thing. So for me, I think a lot of the businesses that are out there, certainly the ones that I work with, they all have good intent, but they often get stopped because of not necessarily budget, but they haven't been able to, what's the word? Sell it in the right way. And that's also something I was very, very pushy in the book for, was how do people in the innovation market sell in projects which don't immediately ring coffers, or might not immediately ring coffers, and that's the thing. And that's why I've really sat down with people like, okay, so when you present this, how do you do it? And that's the thing. They run through it, go, okay, let me stop you there. Brilliant. Definitely could work. Here's how I think you can build on that to make sure you're almost not forcing it through, but giving yourself the best chance for them to get on board with you, And so we talk about how to talk about budget, right? I hate that word. I say money, and that sort of thing, because people understand money, but they're terrified of budgets, And then you
Right.
look at things like length of time to impact, Stop using all the military terms. It's not a fight. That puts fighting word in there. And that sort of thing. But it was literally based on a great book, Winning Not Fighting, by Sifu Julian Hitch and the CEO of Leon, who basically, you look through all of their stuff and they did little things like teaching the baristas to do Wing Chun, right? So very high-end martial arts, but often very slow movements and that sort of thing. And they shaved off £1 million in £1 million per week in wasted time through making coffee smarter. Little things like that can really impact a business. And so when you're asking to do a massive innovation project, people go like, and here's phase 1 and here's phase 2, and we're going to get them here and that sort of stuff. And it puts everybody on edge. And if you just said like, the future of our business, this, and these are how we're going to do it, and you use much softer language and that sort of stuff, you just put people in the right frame of mind to buy what you're selling or get behind what you're selling, So that for me was one of the most important chapters. The other one is how to figure out how to talk to the different generations, because that is what I hate using that phrase generations. It's just bands of young or older people, but it's so important coming into it because of the times that we're living in and living through. You've got to understand that they have different motivations. And also, if you talk to a Gen Zer, you're like, unless you're on TikTok and have 60 bajillion followers and that sort of thing, your chances of buying a house start when your parents die, and that sort of thing. So
Right.
figuring that out, and maybe, what was it? They were like, offer them a gym membership instead of like a profit sharing scheme or something like that. They'll take those different things. It just, we're starting to get to the more sort of personalized way of doing business, I think. And yeah, it's just one of those bits where technology is the driver, but it's actually going to be the people that make or break it still.
those little examples you've given allow me to neatly segue to TBD the conference, which I want to make sure that we also talk about. Because one of the things that I, and to reiterate to listeners, this is how I came across Paul, was this fabulous eclectic mix, and I mean that in the really most positive sense, of presenters. And so there's people like Rory Sutherland, who's been on this show before, that listeners will be familiar with. But you bring in a sort of random selection of people with interesting things to say. And so I cannot recommend this conference enough. And so can you just talk to people a little bit around sort of what can they expect? How does it work?
Yes. Firstly, I'll correct you. It's not random. It's hand collected, curated. And that's
Cute, beautifully correct.
But it will appear random to some people who go there. So TBD, it stemmed from the book. We were going to do a launch event when I wrote the book, but the first time I wrote it, I broke both my hands, so my tendons went. So I couldn't hold the mic or do anything, and that's the thing. So I was like, probably not going to do the event. And then I met this fabulous woman called Nikita, and she said, I get this space for one day a year. Let's do it then. She was like, yep, enjoy yourself. Have fun. See you later. So I organized this event, and TBD, I just basically thought, if I do a conference, it will be like no other conference. And that's not ego. It's just because I hate most conferences that I go to. Most conferences are theater style. So it's sit with all your plebs, look at the Jesus on the front and take it all in. Right. And then we're going to give you the worst coffee you ever had in your life. And we'll feed you really terrible sized plates. It'll be horrible to network, really loud. And there'll be nothing that's made you think that we've actually cared about you taking in the information and that sort of stuff. Or worse, you get these barcode scanners, which are just like, oh, should we add you to a mailing list? And then not really like worry about what your individual issues are. Great. So that's perfect. So at TBD, we built it from the ground up. I built it from the ground up. And I said, right, number one, we're going to be in the round. So everyone surrounds the stage. So it's 360 degrees. You do that for a couple. We work with behavioral psychologists and what do you call it? Scent experts and that sort of thing. For a specific reason. I wanted people to remember what was said on the stage, right? So we have two areas. You have the brain and the rest. And the brain is essentially the stage, and it's 360 in the round. We pump that full of a scent that we made with heckles. And that essentially we up the notes, which would make you remember things on the day, right? So we primed your brain to take in the information. Then we give you a vial of that scent to take home when you exit. And if you want to remember more, you spray the scent around you or wear it and that sort of thing. And you can remember more of what you learned on that day, right? Basic psychology, been done for decades. And then on the external side of it, we didn't just want people to sort of hold a glass and be like, hi, what was the last session that you loved? And that sort of thing. So we actually have little areas of things to do. So the first year we got people to create desk Zen gardens, and we got them to write little wishes on different things. And so, it's on their desk and that sort of stuff. We created sleep kits because we wanted people to sleep better that night and remember it, because we did a 2-day thing. And so all of the things that we do and we get people to do is either it just breaks their remembering pattern, if that makes sense, and goes, oh yeah, I did some fun stuff and I networked with people because we sat around a table and that sort of stuff. And it's all just to help people remember what's said on the stage. And I just decided from the beginning, I didn't want like keynotes or anything like that. I want short, sharp shots of information. So we have 5, what do you call it? Formats. And the main one is the solo one, the 10-minute one, right? So half the, what do you call it? Length of a TED talk. And the reason for that is, as fun as stories are, and as much as I want to know about people's grandmas and how they, ability to make a cookie has influenced how they decided to have a child or whatever it was, I'm like, I don't need that. I just want to know what you want me to tell me and then get off stage, right? So we always make people, you can have your 10 minutes. If you want to tell a story, just tell a quick one. But then we also say at the end, just tell people what you want them to stop doing, right? So that at the end of the day, you've got 30 things, because we have 30 slots essentially, or 30 people, go through and essentially explain how to have a better life by the end of that day, in various ways or forms. So the TB and the D of your life and that thing. And I've had over, 120 people now through the stage. And like you say, you've had Rory, but we've had experts from Oxford University. Well, talk about this year. We've got Snap. They'll be on there. We've got Oxford University. We've got an expert for psychedelics. We've got Slam Poet. She comes back, Miss Yankee. She's amazing. Always a standing ovation. We have Shopify. They're going to talk about the future of e-commerce. And we have everyone in between, from Francesca Spector, who wants to talk about the power of being alone, all the way through to, so Tom Standage comes in from The Economist. Obviously sort of does where the world's going in the next sort of 12 months. So you've got that sort of focus. But yeah, you got PwC, AI, Model E's, Google's coming. It's the usual sort of people, but then we pepper them in with Reddit. Most people wouldn't have on stage, I'm really excited to talk to Elaine Chung. She's from Narasa, which is how they're going to feed the next billion people in China. So we get the people talking on stage who are pushing the world and also pushing you to change how you're feeling so that you can create better in the world as well. Not a lovey-dovey conference. It's very hard hitting. You will certainly come out there with a new sort of like look on life and a very 12-month focus, 12 to 24-month perspective on how you can have a change in your world and the world at large as well. So it's, for me, one of my favorite days, most stressful day of my life, but it's very, very rewarding as well and that sort of stuff. So yeah, for the last 2 years, we've been virtual and hoping to go back physical this year because it is just a different experience. But the virtual ones have been fun as well. You know, you found it through the virtual ones. So yeah, it's quite good.
Yeah, and I think that you beautifully described that. And I want to sort of flag two things up. I think the first one is you're absolutely right. When I say random, it's from my perspective. You never quite know what's going to come next,
Right.
and that's not because you've just randomly pulled some people off the street. It's because you've kept. And I loved it because it forced me in a good sense, right? It encouraged me to listen to things where I might have gone. If I had to commit to an hour's worth of this,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's for me. And sometimes, and that could have been completely wrong. Right? I listened to some things and watched some things where I was just like, I wouldn't have listened to this if it'd been longer, but wow, they've got me. And so it becomes a much more, you're not committing as much time.
Yeah.
People are much punchier with what they deliver. And it sparked my curiosity. I love the extra little nice touches. So you talked about slam poet. She's brilliant. And it's like, I don't think I've been to another conference where there's been a slam poet. And it's great. It just breaks things up. And so the other thing I really like about it is you've got sponsors there and you can genuinely tell this is stuff. This is not kind of Paul going, and now a word from our sponsors. Here's some crap I've been paid to. Like you will only put stuff on there that you genuinely use yourself and that you think is high quality.
Yeah. The key about it is they're not sponsors, they're partners. So I have not got any money if I do something at lunch. So for the last physical one, we gave everybody a lunchbox from Black and Bloom, which are incredibly expensive, high end sort of bits. And I went, I'm not going to charge you for this. You've got a lot of money coming to me through this and that's something. I was like, but you get a good product. And that's what I'm trying to get to people. I was like, you don't have to just ask for money all the time. People will often do a lot more for you if you form a good product around them and say like, this is a vehicle, you can use it beyond year one, and that's the thing. And we're still friends now with Black and Bloom and they do stuff for us all the time. So it's a good one. But
Very clear. It's not artificial. It's very, very authentic.
thank you.
And I really want to emphasize that. And I loved it. And you introduced me to the company called Sedition that does digital art, which is just like mind blowing and great fun. And I ended up with a subscription to them because I just loved what you'd done with it at the conference. So I've got you on partly because I'm fascinated by your ideas, but I really want to push this and say to people, and I'm not being paid to promote this talk. Genuinely great event, and it's one I look forward to. And it's the other bit I love, Paul, is you time it beautifully. It's at that early stage of the year because there's lots of things that happen sort of summer, Q3, Q4, and it's always something at the beginning I'm like, oh, this is fun. And it happens at a time of year where, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, it's a little bit dark, right? We're a bit outside, we're just sort of readjusting to life, and it feels like a really, really powerful force for good. So I want to really encourage people to do that. So links to all of that in the show notes. And I think given the lineup that you've highlighted, I'm just as excited as I have been for the past 2 years to see what comes out. And it's always good at sparking fresh ideas. Yeah. And I wonder, with that in mind, like how do you go about curating something like that? Because there are so many. Because the nature of it's a little bit like human risk in the sense of you could shoehorn lots of things into the TBD thing and it wouldn't be irrelevant. How do you go about picking what you cover?
Yes. That is something that changes all the time because some people you ask and then you get other people and they want to cover that. And maybe they're, that might be the more shocking person to sort of cover it, if that makes sense. So the other thing about TBD is just because somebody works for Twitter, for example, they don't necessarily talk about Twitter. That's what I love about it as well. So we've missed the big point. I never tell you what's going to be talked about at TBD. I tell you a theme and I tell you like areas, but I will not tell you who's talking about what and that thing. And sometimes that's the better part of it is that you'll get somebody who's written a book about being alone, but they'll talk about the power of light technology or something like that, right? It's different, but they're experts because they're passionate about it. So you ask, how do I curate stuff? The God's honest truth is I have massive amounts of A3 paper and I write down at the start of it the theme, which is what matters for this year. And I start with big topics around, and then I start saying, okay, who do I think of right now? And that sort of stuff. You start with the big ones like, oh, Oprah would be great, and that sort of thing. And then you start taking it down a couple of notches. And then you sort of think like, okay, right, who would be good and who hasn't? I think of two things. Like number one, yes, you need some names, But actually, if you look on most of the TBDs, they are not the CEO. The CEOs, if they're startups, because I think that's the smartest sort of way of doing it, you get their vision. But you don't want the CEO of Shopify come in. As fun as that would be, he's not going to say a lot. You want the people who are in the weeds, who are learning those sorts of like hints and tricks and that can sort of disseminate that without getting fired, right? And so those are the sorts of people I sort of chat. And what I love doing what we're doing now, having a quick chat, and that sort of thing, and figuring out what do you like doing when you're not doing your job? Why did you do your job? And that sort of thing. Figuring out, what part of their career are they at? Is it right for them to talk at TBD now? Are they the right person in that organization? Are they saying something that's so poignant right now that needs to be said? And it's not just like who's got a book out, that sort of thing. So me, God forbid. But the other one is you have to then sort of take a step back and go, how do I program this to sort of tell a narrative and not jump around and just infuse AI every fifth one, and that sort of stuff. But it was important for me for two things that I do. So number one, everyone that goes on, I have a little column, T, B, and D, and what do they check off, right? So some just technology, and that makes sense, right? Others go all across the spectrum. TBD, they are the ones that must be there and that sort of thing. The other ones aren't expendable, but I will not necessarily give them, the top billing, but it will fit into a narrative. And then the other way that I do it as well is I look at how exposed they are already, and that sort of thing, and then make a determination of whether they're right people. Rory Sutherland, you gave the example, Rory Sutherland, he did a new format for us called flashcards. And so I created the most ridiculously, possibly offensive, very not tongue in cheek and just possibly, really controversial statements. And he had no clue what was coming. And I flashed them up in front of him and he had to answer. And when I was not bored, but wanted to go on to the next one, I would flash out. He'd have to answer that. If you know Rory, that's incredibly difficult, that man, because he's so intelligent and he can riff. If you said frogs, he'd give you a 45-minute talk and you would come out knowing how the universe works, And so it's an interesting sort of thing for him to sort of be challenged to do that because people haven't seen that before. So I wanted to sort of, test people with formats as well. So it's a labor of love. I won't say it's a quick thing to do. It never is. But as you've seen, it can be just as powerful online as it is offline. And I think I'm excited to do it this year, but venues are proving to be a challenge this year.
And the other point I wanted to make to listeners actually is that what I think is really interesting about it is it's not just something you can go to and consume yourself. It's really good for inspirational ideas about how to do things yourself. So if you call it, you refer to a conference, right? But if you're doing an offsite or team meeting, right, there's really interesting insights there. And I think one of the things that's often missed is people stick to staged formats because that's what they've always done.
Yeah.
We get these tedious conferences, and you beautifully caricatured them. But I think the same thing is true of the way organizations run themselves. And so one of the other things I found really interesting about the way you do it is I'm not necessarily, I'm not going to run my own TBD because what's the point in that? You're doing a much better job of it than I would ever do. But the inspirations give me some great ideas for how to do brainstorming meetings, just different stuff to try. So even if you turn up, right, and the content, which is great, but even if you learn nothing from the content, the format, I think is really interesting and really engaging. And so I'd encourage people to attend it, but to attend it both to look at those two things and say, what can I take away from the format as much from the content?
Interesting. Yeah. I only talk about two. So yeah, there's other ones. You'll have to come along and see.
And so look, as I could keep talking to you forever because you're fabulous. And thank you so much for joining me on the show. Is there anything else I should have asked you?
Oh God. The what's next?
So what is next? Paul, what's next?
What's next? Well, survive in this climate is always a primary one, which is nice. People are throwing stuff, which seems to be annoying lots of people. But no, the next step for me is getting back. I want to go and live back in America. I've decided I love Britain. It will always be my home. But people in America seem to get more from what I'm putting out. They're a bit more yes and sort of thing. I think at the moment we've got a lot to work through before we get fun again, if that makes sense. There's plenty of fun people out there. Don't get me wrong, I love Britain. But from a business perspective and where I'm sort of pushing TBD and sort of what I'm doing, it's going to absolutely fly in America because they need that sort of level. Like you've said earlier, format changes and that sort of thing. It will work really well over there. So that's the next step. So if anyone wants to hire a sort of weird technology person, feel free to drop in my DMs, as they say.
Amazing. And I will put links to all the things that we've talked about in the show notes. But Paul, just remains me to say, one, thank you for all the stuff that you do, because it's just genuinely, as people will have picked up, it's inspirational, it's thought-provoking, it's fun, and it's different.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words. I will endeavor to stay on that pedestal for as long as I can.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Paul for appearing and for you for listening. To find out more about Disruptive Technologies, the new revised version of Paul's book, the TBD Conference, and for your exclusive discount to tickets for that, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, you can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. Finally, a reminder that my new book, Humanizing Rules, Bringing Behavioral Science to Ethics and Compliance, is out in March, and you can pre-order your copy now to get exclusive access to events and content. There are links to where you can get hold of it in the show notes. I will be back very soon with another episode of the show, but in the meantime, stay safe, and thank you so much for listening.